Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me. This is going to be a live recording of Techie Personal Finance Bootcamp, and today's topic is going to be what the tech is a backdoor ROTH. So it's a pretty advanced strategy. It's possible that you might not be using this yourself yet, or it may have been something you've never even heard of that is quite even available. And so I'm going to go over today all the things that you need to know to understand whether or not this is going to impact you, whether it's something you should consider. And also, if it is a good fit for you, there's some amazing benefits that we'll talk through as well. So before I dive in, I'm going to run a little disclosure by you. And also, feel free to submit any questions through the chat. That's going to be coming in on a different screen, so I'm not going to catch it immediately, but I will be checking through the comments, checking to see if there's any questions, and then being able to tackle these things as I go through the recording today, as well as at the end, I'll tackle any ones that I haven't caught. So with that, I'll run this disclosure.
Disclaimer alert. This information's for education, so don't just go use it. First consult with your financial advisor, because that's way more legit. That's it.
So that was Orlando Gomez, and you can catch him. His episode already dropped for this season, so go ahead and find it in your Techie Personal Finance Bootcamp podcast. Find Orlando Gomez, and you can hear about how he broke into tech by writing a jingle, and he's been doing this for all different kinds of brands, all different types of companies, so it's really fun to see him have fun with those. And with that, we can dive right in. So should you use a backdoor ROTH strategy? And that's really why you're here today. Is it something that's going to make sense for you? If so, what's the process that you need to take to make sure you do this the right way? And then what are the big kind of key components that you need to be aware of? And how can you compare this to other strategies that may be relevant or also on the table for you to decide on? So we're going to tackle all of those. But before we dive into the backdoor ROTH, it's important to just go back to the basics of what a ROTH is. And so the backdoor ROTH has all these same benefits, which is why it makes sense to go over this. So a Roth IRA account or a Roth 401k, depending on how you set this up, it's going to provide you tax-free growth. It's going to be able to be something when you retire that you can withdraw it tax-free. And so that's pretty amazing. Another benefit I don't have on here, but that I always like to remind my clients as far as flexibility goes, but you can actually take the contributions that you put into a Roth out without any penalty, without any taxes. You just need to be able to track that. So that's another cool additional flexibility feature of a Roth that you don't get with a traditional IRA or traditional 401k. It's also not going to count as income on your tax return when you go to pull those funds out. So you might be thinking it's not really a big deal right now, or you might not even understand where exactly things go on the tax return or how those quite work. But when you go to retire, there's going to be a lot of things that come into play where having higher income is actually going to hurt you in a lot of ways. One big one that's been around for the last handful of years is health insurance. And so health insurance, when you leave your employer, that cost goes way up. Luckily, there are some subsidies that you might be able to qualify for. But if you're having to pull out a whole bunch of income from your retirement accounts, and on the traditional side, that counts as income, so that hurts you. It means that you might not be eligible for those subsidies. But if you're able to subsidize that with some ROTH contributions to live off early on in retirement, until you get to the Medicare age, you might qualify for subsidies. For a lot of the clients that I've used this with in the past, they could save anywhere between like $12,000 and $24,000 a year just by having Roth funds available to have a little bit more flexibility there. So it could be a big deal to not have this count as income on a tax return, even though you're taking money out once you retire to be able to live off of. Another thing that is probably so far down the road that you haven't thought much about it, there's something called required minimum distributions with traditional IRA accounts, traditional 401ks. Basically, on the traditional side, those funds have never been taxed. And so the IRS wants people to start paying their taxes. And it used to be age 70.5, now it's 72. As of recent events like COVID and a couple of other things going on in the government kind of agendas that they're trying to push and move around. So things are changing there pretty rapidly. And that's something you'll want to keep an eye on. But at the end of the day, traditional accounts always require you to start taking money out, even if you don't need it, or even if you don't need that much of it. There's a calculation that's run and they say, you know what, you have to take out this money. You have to start paying taxes on it. When a Roth situation is going, you have a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k, you don't have to take money out. It's pretty awesome. It gives you a lot of flexibility. One of the reasons why you wouldn't want to take it out anyways is, well, if you don't need the funds, why not let it stay in there, get that tax-free growth, and just let that keep growing tax-free. If you never need it, then anyone who comes behind you as far as beneficiaries, they inherit this huge asset that never has to pay any taxes on. So those are really the key benefits of a Roth. And like I said, those things port directly over to your backdoor Roth if that's something that you end up implementing as far as a strategy. So why would you do a backdoor Roth when you have access to a Roth sometimes, or a Roth 401k? And these are really the two main reasons why you would look into this as far as a strategy. And if you're in tech, quite honestly, if you're not in either of these categories yet, you probably will be here in the near future. Tech, just fields of all different kinds, different backgrounds and roles in tech companies just tend to be paid a little bit higher. And so these things all revolve around income and savings rates. So the first one you might see there is you actually get phased out of making Roth IRA contributions. You may be making Roth IRA contributions right now and saying, no, I don't think I'm phased out yet. Like I said, if you're in tech or if you're in a field where you plan for your income to continue going up at a significant pace, well, you will cross that phase out period. And that's usually when a lot of people find out that, hey, I can't make Roth contributions anymore. It's usually not until they go into TurboTax and they say, hey, I made X amount of contributions for the year. And TurboTax says, no way, like you're not supposed to do that. Here's the steps to go back to your company that you're making those contributions and pull all those funds out because you're no longer eligible. And the tricky thing is, if you're not aware of those phase out income limits, you don't find out until afterwards. So you have to go through the whole headache of unwinding those and having to pay some taxes and penalties and different things potentially if you don't do it right. So you want to be aware of those income phase outs. I'll talk about what those are for 2021 here in just a second. So that's one reason why you may want to do a backdoor Roth is you want to make Roth contributions, but you're phased out and can't make them directly. So hence the backdoor. We're going to find another way to make these Roth contributions happen. So the second one is you might be a high saver. So if you're a high earner, there's the propensity to be able to save a high amount, and you might be capped out at your normal contribution limits for either the traditional or the Roth side. And again, I'll go over those limits as well for 2021, so you'll know what those are. But once you hit that ceiling, you may still want to put additional funds in. And that's really where a backdoor Roth can come into play as far as a strategy on that end too. So the interesting thing is, so those are two reasons why you'd want to do it. It's also the reason why there's two different ways to do the backdoor Roth. So the first one is just a regular backdoor Roth IRA. And here's the income limits that you need to be aware of. So if you're a single filer for your taxes, it starts at $125,000. And basically what happens between the $125,000 as you go through the $140,000, there's a calculation and you're just able to contribute a smaller and smaller amount. Once you pass that $140,000, you can't make any direct Roth contributions. Hence, we're not going to make direct ones with a backdoor strategy. We're going to go through the backdoor for those. So same kind of issue for filing jointly, slightly higher income limits. And if you ever heard me talk about taxes in the IRS, a lot of times this stuff doesn't make sense. And this is one of those examples. So you would think the filing joint would just be a double amount. So you would think that the beginning phase out would be about $250, but it's not. It's $198,000. So very different as far as how the IRS chose to make those rules versus some of the other things like your standard deductions or exact doubles. So it's very strange how the IRS picks and chooses when they want to make filing jointly double of the amount of situations of those single filers. And it just boggles the brain that they constantly are inconsistent like that. So that's the backdoor Roth. The mega backdoor Roth is exactly what you think it is. It's way bigger. It allows you to do a lot more contributions than just the backdoor Roth. And that's because it's going to happen within your 401k. So it's basically the 401k version of the backdoor Roth. But again, these limits are going to be higher. I'll talk to those in a minute when I just kind of have a chart. We'll tackle all these things and you can kind of see how they compare and contrast. But basically after you pass those normal contributions and you're like, I could still save more. How come I can't save more? Well, you may be able to, and may with a star asterisk next to that, because it really depends on your 401k plan if they allow you to do it. So first, let's dig into the details and the process of the backdoor Roth. So the big thing, and I just want to point this out at front, because this is really where I see people that are trying to do it themselves really shoot themselves in the foot. They make a mistake. And I got a couple examples to show you how this is a big mistake. So you want to avoid the pro rata rule. And what the pro rata rule says is basically to do a backdoor Roth cleanly, you want to make sure there's no traditional IRA account balance that's never been taxed before. So it's pre-tax dollars in that traditional side of an IRA account. One interesting fact is that 401k, the traditional 401k, doesn't factor into this calculation. And so what the kind of sneaky way to do this, and the way to make this clean for you, if you have already accumulated a large traditional IRA balance, is you can contribute to the 401k plan and roll those funds over. So roll your old traditional IRA into your new 401k that you have with your current work, and that will zero this out, and then it makes it nice and clean. After that, after you know that it's going to be a clean IRA account, there's no pre-tax funds in the traditional IRA, then you can deposit into the IRA account for the year up to the contribution that you're allowed. And basically, this will be a non-deductible contribution. And the reason for that is because you would only do a backdoor Roth strategy if you're already phased out of the Roth side of things. So if you can't make Roth contributions directly, you're almost 100%. It's not quite 100% guaranteed to make non-deductible IRA contributions. The one reason why it wouldn't be is if you don't have a 401k plan, if you're working at a startup, well, technically, when you make those IRA account contributions, they will be tax deductible, which is actually perfectly fine. I'm not going to go into that example today unless you guys have questions. If this applies to you where you're in the Roth phase out, but you can make deductible IRA contributions because you work at a startup and they don't provide you a 401k plan, then let me know. I can tackle the little bit more complexity of how and why that works. But basically, if that's cleaned out, you make your IRA account contribution, you're phased out of making deductible ones, then you can immediately take those funds out and convert them to a Roth. And there's no tax impact because as the funds went into the IRA account, you didn't pay taxes and you didn't avoid taxes either. It didn't reduce the tax liability on your taxes. When you report that on your taxes, which you will want to do, even though it's a no tax impact situation, you still want to have it all flow through your tax return. So you'll report that you made a contribution. TurboTax or your CPA or accountant, whoever it is that you work with, will say, hey, that's great, you made this contribution. It's not going to reduce your taxes. And you're like, that's fine. That's part of the backdoor Roth strategy. So you're all good there. As you convert that over to the Roth, because there was no tax benefits applied to it, no tax impact, it just kind of moves over cleanly. And it's basically like you made a Roth contribution directly. It's pretty crazy. That's the other thing that happens with the IRS where it just doesn't make sense. Why give this the approval? And the IRS has said and recognized like, hey, we know people do this. It's totally fine. We're not going to go after anyone. Well, if that's the case, why not remove the limitations in that phase out income to make Roth contributions directly? Like this is totally unnecessary. All they have to do is remove the income phase out limits and you can just make those Roth contributions directly without having to worry about the pro rata rule, without worrying about feeding this through your taxes properly and accurately. And it's the same thing. It goes into a Roth account almost like you made a direct Roth contribution, but you had to go through all these hoops. And it's kind of interesting how that applies. I'm just going to check and see if there's any comments coming through. No questions at this time. So we'll dive into the mega backdoor, or I want to show you the pro rata examples actually. So here's what happens if you don't have a clean IRA account. So if you have traditional IRA funds and you've never paid taxes on it because funds typically go into the IRA as pre-tax dollars. So that's $6,000 there. You do after-tax contribution, which is what we're going to do for the backdoor Roth contribution. So we say, hey, I can make a $6,000 non-deductible. IRA contribution now. So now there's 12,000 in the account, but you only want to convert 6,000 because that's how much you put in specifically for this backdoor Roth. You run into some trouble because the taxable amount, because it's 6,000 is only half of the 12,000, which is the new balance. Then that means the pro rata rule means 50% of it will be your pre-tax, and then 50% of it will be your after-tax non-deductible portion. And so you actually end up paying $3,000 worth of, or the income that counts on your tax return is $3,000 of that conversion. And if you're at a tax bracket of 24%, what that means is you pay $720 to get $6,000 into the Roth account. And that's not what you want to do. That's not the best way to do the backdoor Roth. That's why this pro rata rule stinks. And you really want to avoid it and have it nice and clean before you deal with it. Another issue here is, well, since you had to move over the pre-tax normal kind of traditional IRA account balance that was already there, that means you didn't even move over the full 6,000 of the after-tax contributions that you made. So really your after-tax contributions are stuck there. Half of them are stuck there. And even though that 3,000 itself isn't going to be taxable whenever you take that out in the future, any growth that does occur, you actually do end up paying taxes on it. So it really becomes a pain in the butt where, well, now this 3,000 grows to 5,000, 2,000 of that you're actually needing to pay taxes on it. When it comes out, you still get your original $3,000 back without having to pay taxes because you didn't get any of those tax benefits. But it's just a pain in the butt. And one of the reasons why this stuff can get pretty messy and complicated, and that's actually not too bad of a situation. Take a look at this guy. So the large balance one. Let's say you have an old traditional IRA account that already had $100,000 from your old 401k that you started up and rolled over. You make this 6,000 non-deductible contribution because you want to do the backdoor Roth and you're trying to do an awesome thing. You do the 6,000 conversion, and what happens to the pro rata rule here is that 6,000 you made in after-tax money as far as the contribution is such a small portion of that big balance now. Basically, almost all of it's taxed at the end of the day when you go to do that Roth conversion. So 5,640 is going to be income that's going to be taxed when you do the Roth conversion. You can see that the taxes due on that would be $1,354. So super painful on only a $6,000 conversion. And what happens is that $6,000 that you wanted to aim to do that the backdoor Roth contribution for, 5,640 of it, so a majority of it is stuck still in the traditional IRA. So this is why you want it clean. So this is a lot messier than one of the smaller balances. Then this is what we really want. We want no traditional IRA balance when you make your non-deductible after-tax IRA contribution. Then you can convert it over cleanly. There's nothing taxed because you didn't receive any tax benefits. There's no pro rata rule, so you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to pay taxes, and there's nothing stuck in the IRA. So at the end of the day, you put 6,000 into the IRA, no taxable situation, move it over to the Roth, and no taxes again. And now it starts to grow tax-free in that Roth account and all those other benefits. So that's really why you want to clean those things out. I'm just going to check, make sure there's no comments or questions on that, because that's really where people mess up. And I started doing taxes a few years ago, and people that are the do-it-yourselfers or say, hey, I did a backdoor Roth, and then I look at it, I was like, this isn't the way you wanted to do it. I have to educate them and coach them on that and let them know that you ended up paying taxes on the situation and it's still not cleaned up. But here's the steps of how to do that. And so if you have any questions about any of these, obviously they're complicated. I have a couple of cheat sheets for each of them separate. So if you need a cheat sheet for the backdoor Roth or the mega backdoor Roth, just shoot me an email. I can send that over to you as a PDF within a couple of minutes. So it's pretty easy to send a PDF out these days. So let's dive into the mega backdoor. The key with this one, luckily we don't have to worry about the pro rata rule. Again, one of the IRS rules that don't make a ton of sense to me. You have to worry about it with the IRA side of things, but with the 401k, you don't have to worry about this. But the thing you do have to make sure is that your employer is actually going to allow this. So they must allow after-tax contributions and then also in-plan Roth conversions. If they only let you do the after-tax contributions, you're going to run into that pain in the butt factor where, yep, you can throw like $6,000 in there, but if it grows to 10,000, 4,000 of it will be taxed, but the 6,000 you could always get out without paying tax on it. What we want though is we want that tax-free growth and tax-free withdrawal. So we want that in-plan Roth conversion to be a piece of that whole puzzle in order to make this mega backdoor Roth conversion strategy work for you. So once you know that that's available, you're going to choose your preferred contribution type. And this isn't a traditional versus Roth debate today, because backdoor Roths are their own kind of unique thing in addition to that debate. But basically, you'll figure out what it is that you're doing, probably whatever you're doing now, unless there's any new information that would incentivize you to change your mind. But basically, you say, this is the amount I want to do. You're going to cap it out at the $19,500 unless you're age 50 or older. And you're going to do that just like you would normally. So that's still the normal thing that you're probably doing already if you're maxing out your 401k plan. If you're not quite there yet, you may not even have to worry about any of these backdoor plans, because technically you can just throw money into the Roth account. So that's one of the tricky things too. If you learn about the backdoor Roth either from this event or talking to coworkers or friends or neighbors or any of that, and you're like, oh, I want to do a backdoor Roth, but you're not even taking advantage of the easier, just make Roth contributions to your 401k, or if your income's not in a spot where you're phased out, well, just make Roth contributions. You don't need to go through these backdoor things if you still have capacity to make normal Roth contributions between your 401k or your IRA account. But definitely good to have in mind though, because like I said, your income's going to continue going up, especially if you're killing it at your job and just doing awesome. Your income's going to go up, and eventually you will be maxing these things out. Eventually you will be phased out of the backdoor or the straight Roth contributions. And that's when these backdoor strategies are really going to be helpful. So it'd be good to know it now, and then you can brush up on it right before you implement them. So after you do that basic thing of maxing out your contribution the normal way, then you'll have to decide on, well, what's the contribution rate that you're going to do for the after-tax contribution? Because the mega backdoor works because you can actually contribute more than that. And that's going to be after tax money. And that's really what we need to be available there. If the plan does not have an automatic Roth conversion, most of them do at this point, but a couple of years back they didn't. You may need to go in and manually convert these things. And it might be a pain to do it every paycheck if you have to manually do it, but I would say at least do it quarterly. And if you can, try to do it monthly if you do have to manually do it. If they will do it automatically for you, and if you're at Fidelity, most of them that will, you just want to set that up to be automatic, because there's no benefit not to do it automatically. Because like I said, if there's any growth that occurs after you make that contribution, that growth portion before it's converted to the Roth side, you'll end up paying taxes on that one day once you withdraw it. As soon as you can convert it over to the Roth, the sooner that growth in the investment will grow tax-free for you. So how does a backdoor Roth compare? And kind of highlighted it. It's not a traditional IRA versus Roth debate or traditional 401k versus Roth debate. And the reason for that is because you already have those things available, and you can take advantage of those however you want. You can max out to the traditional side if that's what you want to do. You can max out the Roth side if that's what you want to do. The backdoor Roth and the mega backdoor Roth, this is supplemental. So this is on top of, and so it's in addition to whatever you already have as your preference for the traditional versus Roth debate. And so what that means is the true comparison is going to be a non-retirement account. So if you just open up a Fidelity account, if you've been given stock from your employer, all these things are happening outside of a retirement account, so a non-retirement account. And that's what we'll break down as far as how does this compare to that. So have this little sheet. I'll talk you through it because, like I said, this is a recorded podcast. I'm going to talk my listeners through this. So I think the biggest thing to identify is, well, non-retirement accounts are really easy. People just do them on accident. They receive it from employer stock. The non-retirement accounts are really easy to open, really easy to manage. It gets very hard with the backdoor Roth because we saw the pro rata rule really being the biggest issue there. Then even with the mega backdoor, Roth, there's just additional things you have to navigate as far as contribution rates and getting those things all set up. Once you get these things locked down, they become pretty easy, but it's just that first 1 or 2 years to get in the rhythm and truly understand how these things work that make them hard. The next important thing is tax treatment. So tax-free on all the Roth side of things. So all the backdoor Roth, mega, regular, even just normal Roth contributions that you have from before. And with the non-retirement account, there's capital gains tax rates. So capital gains tax rates actually aren't too bad right now. That is in the crosshairs of the government to be changing possibly. So that's one thing you want to keep an eye on. Right now, they're not too bad. It's 0% for low earners, 15% for most everyone else. And then for really high earners, usually like in the $600,000 of income range, then you're going to have 20% capital gains rates. So those are important to know because they do come as a factor. Whenever you pay taxes on something, well, that means you don't have the full amount of what you withdrew or what you invested at that point. So very, very important piece and a very important piece of what makes the backdoor Roth or any Roth contribution so beneficial. There are no contribution limits to a non-retirement account. So that's another thing that makes it really easy. You can throw as much as you want in there and not have to worry about bumping up against any contribution limits. With the backdoor Roth right now, the contribution limit is $6,000. And if you happen to be age 50 or older, you can throw an additional $1,000 at that. On the mega backdoor side, this calculation is a little crazy as far as how you do it, but the annual total contribution that can be made into your traditional 401k plan or your 401k plan in any capacity is $58,000. And so how you find out what the most you can throw into a mega backdoor Roth is first you take that $58,000 total that could ever be contributed. You subtract your maxed out contribution of $19,500. This can go up by $6,500 if you're age 50 or older. You will also minus out the employer match. And this is rare, but I still want to throw it out there because some employers do this. If your employer does any type of profit share, you also need to subtract that amount that you expect them to contribute. So at the end of the day, you could be anywhere from about 30 to 40,000 typically is going to be the range, unless your employer contributes at a high rate, then you'll be a little bit less. But that's why it's a mega backdoor, because that's significantly larger than $6,000 that you can do into a regular basic backdoor Roth. One thing I want to point out, and for anyone watching, you kind of see the asterisk at the bottom. So Roth conversions can be withdrawn 5 years after the conversion, but the gains need to stay in the account. If you take the gains out, then there's a 10% penalty. But if you made a $6,000 backdoor Roth contribution for 2021, in 2026, you can take the $6,000 out, no penalties, no taxes, but the gain. So if that grew to 10,000, if you took that additional 4,000 that gained, you will pay a 10% penalty. So you want to avoid that until you reach age 59 and a half. So that's really the biggest downside with the backdoor Roth is there is still that nagging age limitation for accessing the funds 100% without having to qualify for that 5-year time frame or the growth kind of issue. So those are really the big downsides and cons. But again, with the Roth conversion, there is some flexibility where 5 years after that, you can access those funds. And if you do backdoor Roth every single year, so 6,000, 6,000, 6,000, basically that 5-year timeline is tied to each conversion. So a conversion that you do in 2021, that will be available in 2026. A conversion you do in 2022 will be available in 2027. And again, those are just the contributed amount that you did the conversion on, not the growth. So be aware of that. And once we actually see what the tax impact is, this is just kind of a small scale example for you guys. But if someone was making a $6,000 annual contribution, they are going to earn 7% average annual growth rate for the next 25 years. The non-retirement is on the left side. And so these first 3 fields that I'll talk through are exactly the same because the future value, they're all growing at the same pace, is going to be $379,494. So that's a ton of money, especially when you consider that you only put $150,000 in. And so the gain in both the situations, the non-retirement account and the backdoor Roth situation, is you have gained $229,494, where it starts to change and it really starts to put the backdoor Roth ahead of the just non-retirement account option is the tax rate. So right now I'm using the capital gains tax rate of 15%. That would account for $34,424 in taxes. So that's really the true difference between these two scenarios. And that also doesn't factor in if you're a high earner when you're taking these funds out, or as you're having these capital gains situations, as there's an additional Medicare surcharge that you have to be aware of too. That's about 3 to 4% that you want to know. Well, that's an additional tax I didn't use in this cleaner example. So there's actually more taxes than what I'm portraying here. This is kind of best case argument for a non-retirement account. And you might think the $34,000, that's not too bad of a trade-off to have a little bit more flexibility, be able to access that a little bit earlier. But I have another example where the only thing I change is the growth rate. So if you're really aggressive, if you think that your investments will grow faster than that 7% pace, here's an example for 10%. So a 10% growth rate for that same 25 years, for that same $6,000 annual contribution, the future value is $655,090. So ridiculously huge change just off of a 3% additional annual growth rate. A lot of that is because of the compound effects. You still invested the same amount as the previous example. So still 150,000 total invested of your own money. And so that gives you a gain of $505,090. Again, using that same example of a 15% tax rate, now the difference is $75,764. So it does start to amount to be a significant number. And again, just a reason for, well, these backdoor Roths are pretty neat and useful if the situation calls for it. So that tackles a lot. I know it's a super complex topic. I see a couple of comments coming in. So I have a question about 401k doesn't count as traditional IRA. So I have a question that says, did I say that the 401k doesn't count as a traditional IRA? And that's correct in the pro rata example. So when you have to worry about the pro rata situation, that's only when you're doing the backdoor Roth. So not the mega backdoor Roth, just the backdoor Roth. That's the only time you have to worry about the pro rata situation. And that includes your traditional IRA account, but it will not include your 401k account. That balance doesn't come into that pro rata equation. And so that's why the trick is to move the funds from a traditional IRA, if you already have one of those set up, to your current 401k plan. Most 401k plans will allow that. Obviously, you'll want to check before you send them over, or check for a rollover. But basically, you roll over that traditional IRA to your current 401k, and then it removes that IRA account balance. That IRA account balance for that pro rata calculation will then be zero for the pre-tax funds, and so you don't have to worry about it for the pro rata situation. So yeah, definitely a good question. And again, the pro rata one is the one that trips everyone up. If you are interested in kind of finding out more of any of this, if this is the first time meeting me, I know I didn't do an introduction, and one of the reasons for that is because this is just really a live recorded podcast, but as well as mostly clients, friends, families, their friends and family are on here. So I'm not trying to do a big pitch. I'm not trying to do a big introduction or explain who I am. I just really want to get into the details that are really going to help you. But if you do want to find out more, stay in touch and connected with me, you'll definitely want to look to connect with me on any social media platform that you use. I use most of them, but Twitter and LinkedIn are the most prominent for me. You can subscribe to either my newsletter or to my podcast. Rate my podcast if you think that's valuable information. And if you're an existing client and you need to meet up, just schedule a time. But I also still have room for probably a handful more clients throughout the rest of the year, which is kind of a crazy thing to say. Before I was like, let me have all the clients in the world, but now it's kind of 1 to 2 a month. It's all I can handle, along with my awesome clients I already have, as well as balancing my family life. Let me know if you have any additional questions. But while those are coming in, I just want to say thank you for attending. Thanks for being a part of this presentation live podcast event. I don't do these too often, but when I do, I definitely get excited for them. And for anyone that's going to be hoping to see more of these in the future, definitely will be. But I would say the biggest thing there is we are on baby watch now for baby number 4. And so something will come up and there might be a couple weeks gap where you won't hear from me, just because we're all getting adjusted to having a 4th baby around. And so I'll be cranking these out up until that point, have an adjustment period, and then I'll dive right back in. And so if you ever have a suggestion for a topic, let me know. And usually when someone requests something, it moves up to the top of my queue. Otherwise, I have like a 200 page kind of situation where I can just crank out content and talk about anything. And so I just work through the lines unless someone has me bump something up. So thanks everyone for attending. Let me know what you thought. Reach out to me if you have any additional questions I can help tackle for you. But this was a really fun event for me, and I'll stick around another couple minutes to see if any questions pop in. But you guys are free to go for the night. Enjoy your night, and let me know what you think about the content that you heard today.